the synagogue itself was not set on fire. What happened is some Nazis from outside of the town came in, took all the holy objects out into the street, and burned them there. The books, the Torahs, and just all the objects. They were destroyed. Actually, my grandparents lived above the synagogue in an apartment. This plaque is now outside of it. Just a rough translation says that this synagogue was started in 1888 for the Jewish community. And then in 1938, it, I guess, ended. The Jewish community was either deported or murdered, and this plaque was put up so that their memories would never be, the atrocities would never be forgotten. This is the Jewish cemetery. Before I talk a little more about that, I'm going to talk a couple of little stories. That evening of Kristallnacht, when the Nazis came in, they went up the stairs to my grandfather and my great-grandparents' apartment and rounded up the family. My grandfather escaped by jumping out of the window. My great-grandfather and great-grandmother were taken to camps. I'll get into more of what happened to them a little bit later, but just keep that in mind. This is the Jewish cemetery in Arlington. It still survives. My grandparents were invited back in 1993 by the mayor, there's the Burgermeister, invited all the survivors of the Holocaust back to town so they could, visit the town again. The tall tombstone on the right there is actually the tombstone of my great-great-grandfather. He was a teacher and a cantor in the synagogue. He was employed by the synagogue from 1900 to 1916 when he passed away. Things were in such upheaval and chaos after the war that the Holocaust Memorial in Israel and official German records say that he perished or disappeared during World War II, even though you can see right there on the tombstone that he died in March of 1916. It also says that my great-grandmother passed away in the Holocaust, even though she died in 1975. So, this is a picture of my great-grandfather during World War I. You can see the background is an illustration, and then the actual face is a photograph. I actually have this at my house. It's probably about this big. He was a corporal, fought for the Kaiser in World War I. And then there's his face on 3 different poses of himself. So World War I was in the late 19-teens. Who would have thought less than 20 years later he would be handed one of these, a passport with a swastika on the front, his head shaven, and all his rights taken away. Luckily, since he did fight for Germany during World War I and received a medal for his service during World War I, he was treated a little better, I guess. He was allowed to leave the country. So you can see on the bottom there is his green card. It actually was green. I can't really tell it there. And he actually arrived in New York in 1939. It's a picture of my great-grandmother. She was actually left in Germany a little longer, and she got it over here in August of 1939. I actually have a paper with her emigration paper that said she was actually allowed to leave the country of Germany to come over here. They had 4 children, one being my grandfather, who's actually still alive. He just celebrated his 90th birthday in December. He had 2 older sisters. One moved to Israel after the war, and one I actually knew. She passed away around 10 years ago. She lived in Baltimore also, along with my grandfather. And there was an eldest brother who had moved to Israel also. Here's a picture from World War II of my grandfather. He actually fought for the United States in World War II. He came over in 1939, and these pictures are from 1943 from Wisconsin, Truax Field. Let's see if I can circle. That's him, and that's That's him horsing around. All right. Some stories. I told you the story about him jumping out the window. There was another story. When I went up to Maryland for the holidays, for Hanukkah this past December, I asked him, to tell me some stories about, what life was like or what happened with him and the Nazis and stuff like that. One of the stories he told was he was walking home with his older brother and one of their friends after playing soccer, and some of the Nazis started picking on him, saying, "Hey, you Jews, what are you doing here?" kind of thing. And there, from what my grandfather said, there was like 5 to 7 of the Nazis and 3 of them. And my grandfather and his brother and the friend beat up the Nazis and then ran home scared, thinking that, they're going to get caught and killed. But the Nazis didn't want to admit that they got beat up by by 3 Jews. So nothing ever happened with it. Another thing that happened was my great-grandmother was walking home from buying groceries or whatever, and a couple of the Hitler Youth, which I guess they're kind of like the Hitler Boy Scouts, but they were a little older, started picking on her and slapped her in the face. And so she came home, and my grandfather and his brother came home from doing whatever, and she told them about it. So my grandfather and his brother went and got some fence pickets and went and found the Nazis that did that to their mother and beat them. And of course nothing came out of it again because the Nazis didn't want to admit that they got beat up by some Jews. But like I said, that part of the family got out and were able to make it to America, and so I'm here because of that. If things had gone differently, if, let's say, my grandfather or my great-grandfather didn't fight in World War I and didn't receive the medal, I may not be standing here today, because my grandfather might have ended up in an extermination camp and would have been slaughtered. One of the family members who did pass away that I was told about was the husband of a cousin of my grandfather. He was kind of placed in charge of the other Jews in the camp, whatever camp it was, and was given some special privileges, maybe a little bit more food or something like that. And so the other people in the camp got jealous and beat him to death. So he didn't make it. So that's all I have to say for now. I'll have some closing words at the end of the program. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Farah Hughes. Dr. Hughes is a licensed clinical psychologist and an assistant professor of psychology here at Francis Marion. And today she will discuss the treatment of the mentally and physically disabled during the Holocaust.
Please don't think I'm strange, but I want to break protocol for just a second. Larry, you didn't have the opportunity to say their names. And I'm all about, this is a day to honor and remember. And so I wondered if you would want to say their names. I don't know if that microphone is on.
Hold on. I'll wait for Brad to turn it. Okay. My great-grandfather, or the great-great-grandfather, the tombstone that you saw, his name was Bernhard Sam. My great-grandfather, his name was Jacob Kaufman. My great-grandmother's name was Bertha Kaufman, and my middle name is taken from her name. My middle name is Brian, and in the Jewish tradition, you're named after deceased relatives. So her name is Bertha, and my grandfather's name is Bernard Kaufman.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a privilege to be invited to be on this panel, so thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I want to credit the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for most of the photos and some of the information that I'm going to be presenting to you today. I like images, so I brought some slides with some images. I like, Mr. Falk, I like to give you, to personalize it a little bit, to sort of hit it home as much as I can. And I encourage you, especially you students, whenever you're in the DC area,